Hello, I'm Rebecca 48 and I'm facing early onset Alzheimer's. And thanks for watching my first YouTube video. I can't believe I'm doing this because I'm old and I don't even really use social media. So this has been fun. I tried posting my first YouTube video a few weeks ago, and really it was just one of my TikTok videos, and I was told to take it down. That is not the way to do YouTube. So I spent some time looking up how to do YouTube videos, and I can't do it because I've got Alzheimer's. So I'm just going to do it this way, and hopefully all will follow along regardless of how I set this up. Anyways, in my first video, it was just kind of a brief synopsis of like what has got me to this early onset Alzheimer's journey I'm on. And two of the things I mentioned in the previous video were kind of like red flags, I guess. And so I'm going to just get into those a little bit more. The first one being the eggs, leaving the eggs on the stove. Now that, as far as I'm concerned, is fairly common if you're stressed, you're tired, you haven't slept, you have perimenopause, ADHD, anxiety, any of the things. You can forget something on the stove. I'm very aware of that. And so, yeah, that's not uncommon. What made this a little different is that I lived in a heritage home, very, very old. Had put the eggs on to boil, and then I decided I was going to walk downtown. And so I did. I walked downtown. It was a half an hour walk in the blazing sun. As I got downtown, I realized I left the stove on with the eggs boiling. So I panicked, obviously, as you would. And I called people in my building to see if they were home, if they could go like get into my apartment. Nobody was home. So I ran home. Oh my God, I ran so fast. As soon as I got there, I opened the door, massive black smoke everywhere. And I had a huge apartment and it was covered. Now, had I not remembered when I did, and say I remembered 5 minutes later, the whole place would have been on fire. Like, it was bad. So, and again, still, there was no discussion at this point of Alzheimer's. This is just me thinking I'm stressed. So there was that. And then I did mention leaving my keys in the car. So that was a funny story. It's one of my favorite stories, actually, because it's actually so like, are you serious? I was at the gym and I had driven there, went into the gym, did my workout, came back out, had my bag, looked in my bag to get the keys to start the car to go home, and couldn't find them. I actually, at that point, was not somebody who lost things. So it was kind of frustrating because I was like, what the hell? Anyways, I look, wasn't in my purse. I looked like 3 times. Looked under my seat, wasn't there. Looked under the passenger seat, wasn't there. Got out of the car, went and looked in the back, thought maybe it like grew legs or something, and then just like walked to the back seat. Was not there. Went back into the front, looked in my purse again a million times, nothing. So to get out of the car, I look on top of the roof because, sometimes you leave your coffee on the top of your car or whatever. Wasn't there. Looked under the car, not there. Okay, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm going to go back in. I probably left them in the gym. So go back in. I go to the locker, not there. I go to each piece of equipment that I was using, not there. Go back to my car, do the whole thing all over again. Looked in my purse, looked under the seats, in the back, on top. So then at that point, I was frustrated. It was about 20 to 30 minutes of me looking for my keys. And I sat in the driver's seat, and I just I was like this. And then I realized the car was running. The keys were in the ignition and the car was on the whole time. Yeah. Still didn't think Alzheimer's. I just was like, wow, I'm stressed. Yeah. So, and I mean, at that point I was working with a psychiatrist because, I've been a single mom since I was 19. I do have mental health issues. I'm in recovery, 15 years sober. So working with a psychiatrist or a doctor over mental health issues, especially if I'm stressed. And at that point I was off work I took a year off. I was really only thought I was taking a few weeks off, but it ended up being a year. But yeah, at that point, I just was like, yeah. So I'm telling this to my psychiatrist, and she's like, this is not mental health. So she did some cognitive tests. She did the Montreal cognitive assessment on me, and I failed that hard. She actually sent me in for a driving test because at that time too, I started having weird like spatial confusion. And how I describe that best is like, there's like that lip from the sidewalk to the road. My brain didn't know where my foot should go to land on the road following the lip. And that was also happening while driving too. Like if I looked to the right or whatever and there'd be like a car coming, I wouldn't really necessarily know the actual distance of like, could I go or not go? And so she sent me for a driving test that they do for people like in their 80s when they're like taking drivers away, cognitive driving test. And so the poor young man was like, you are the youngest old person I've ever done this test for. And I was like, well, thank you so much. Anyways, I passed the test, which is good. He did help me. I'm not going to lie. He helped me a little bit. But anyways, so it was sort of these kind of things that were happening that were just like, okay, this isn't stress. And I don't know. I hear this a lot, but like the medical system is like underpaid, understaffed, overworked. And I try to take, the gaslighting, I just try not to take it too personally. And like, yes, everything I go to the doctor for, they're like, yeah, you have mental health issues. And it's like, okay, that's fair. I do. But like, is that always the thing? Anyways, so yeah, I mean, those are just a few of the things that were happening at that time. And like, I mean, there was definitely other like very obvious things that were not anxiety. Like I was stuttering. Like who stutters? Like I stutter. I stutter now because I have, early onset Alzheimer's. But back then I didn't. I was like, it was actually embarrassing because like I can be like very well spoken, but I was having a hard time getting the words like from my brain to my mouth. Like I couldn't get the words out, and so I would stutter. And then another thing that was happening was like I would be talking blah, 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 and then blank. Completely forget what I'm talking about. I remember the first time I was on the phone because at the time I was having phone appointments with my just general doctor. And I remember the day that she heard it because at this point it was just like, this is what's going on and you're telling them, right? But they don't see it. But I was in the middle of explaining something to her and I just went completely blank. And she's like, oh my God, this is what you've been talking about. And I was like, thank you. Because, like, you're just like, people think you're crazy. So, and then you start to think you're crazy. And then I start to think, oh, well, I must be making this up. But it was really good and validating to hear her, like, actually experience that. So, and I've been going to the same therapist for 9 years. And so she started taking notes too, because I've always been a show up for appointments 20 minutes early. That's just who I've always been. I was missing my appointments. I was late. I would text her and be like, I'm like running late. And so she started noticing like, that is not like Rebecca at all. And so there was some just very obvious things happening that were not aligning with my diagnosis of ADHD, anxiety, depression, and like, being in recovery and all that stuff. So I still never thought there was a cognitive impairment happening, but I think under the surface of things, the team that I was working with were starting to see that there was. And so I think that's why I did get referred to a neurologist. So I've got lots of stories and I'm going to keep sharing, and I hope you guys just join along, and I love your comments, and thank you. I'll see you guys soon.